Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Margot Parmenter, and I'm the events coordinator at the Hub City Bookshop in Spartanburg, South Carolina. We're so excited to have you join us tonight for a conversation with Anne Heltzel, author of the spine-chilling modern Gothic novel, Just Like Mother, which was named a most anticipated title by Crime Reads, Goodreads, Book Riot, and more. Anne will be joined in conversation by Andy Marino, author of The 7 Visitations of Sydney Burgess and the upcoming It Rides a Pale Horse. Anne and Andy are authors who also happen to be engaged to each other, and they're joining us together today from their home in the Hudson Valley. Anne, Andy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is awesome.
I'm so excited to hear more about this book, about your other books, about anything you guys want to talk about, and I know the audience is as well. But before I hand it over to our authors, I'd like to quickly introduce our bookshop for anyone who isn't familiar with us. The Hub City Bookshop is a full-service independent bookstore serving the literary community of upstate South Carolina. We're part of a larger organization called the Hub City Writers Project, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to cultivate readers and nurture writers. One of my favorite ways we do that is through author conversations like this one, where we get to hear from published writers and also connect those writers to our wonderful readers. If you want to find out more about us, our mission, programming, upcoming events, please head to our website, hubcity.org, and sign up for our newsletter. Also, if you have not yet purchased your copy of Just Like Mother, please know that you can click the green button right at the bottom of your screen and buy a brand new beautiful copy from us at Hub City. Buying the book through our shop is one of the best ways to support the Writers Project. Okay, one final logistical thing before I properly introduce our authors. Please, please, please feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll reserve some time at the end to make sure we get to them, but the authors may also just pick up on the chat and answer them during the event. So there's no restriction on time. Please feel free to put a question in the chat, and you can also use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. It doesn't look like a button, but if you click on those words, a dialog box will pop up and you can drop your question in there. Do not be shy. We have 2 amazing writers with us, so please feel free to ask all the questions that you have. And without further ado, I'll introduce our authors. Anne Heltzel is a New York-based novelist and book editor. In addition to writing horror, she has penned several milder titles for children and young adults. Just Like Mother is her adult debut. For more information, visit her website or follow her on Twitter. Andy Marino is the author of The 7 Visitations of Sydney Burgess and the forthcoming novel, It Rides a Pale Horse. In addition to horror for adults, he writes historical fiction for young readers, most recently Escape from Chernobyl. And Andy, I'm going to hand it over to you to take over the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Margot. It is really awesome to be here, and thank you to everyone who's joining us. Oh, there we go. I don't have to be on a wicked lean anymore. I'm in the frame.
There we go.
We're really excited about this. We are here primarily to talk about Anne's novel, Just Like Mother. Can you see that? Oh, it looked like the eyes blinked. Maybe we'll touch on mine at the end or something like that. But I wanted to reiterate, pop in the chat, ask us a question at any point. We are happy to sort of make this a free-flowing conversation.
Especially because Andy already knows the answers to any question he could ask me. So please chime in.
So I'd like to let Anne introduce the book, and then we'll maybe get into a discussion of the themes and the characters and things like that, and maybe not too much about the plot, so we don't give too much away, but we'll navigate that. And then I'd also really like to talk about sort of nuts and bolts writing stuff, because that really interests me, and hopefully that would be of interest to you guys too. But like I said, pop into the chat at any point. So here's Just Like Mother, and I will let Anne introduce the book.
Okay, we can stop showing it.
I want to hold it.
Just Like Mother is, at its heart, for better or worse, a cult novel. It's about the cults of motherhood, which I use as a metaphor to touch on society's pressure on women to follow a specific trajectory at a certain point in age. And it was a reaction to just my own circumstances in my early to mid 30s as a single person who was surrounded by people who were coupled and starting families and started to feel sort of like an outsider, as though everyone else got a message that I had not received. So it's about two cousins. They call themselves cousins, but they're not actually sure of their parentage, who were born into this cult and then part ways for about 2 decades, come back together in adulthood, and are initially really excited to reignite their friendship. But then they start to realize something is amiss, and they have to sort of confront the terrors of their past and grapple with their troubled childhoods.
Thank you, Anne. That was a great introduction to the book. So I think I want to jump right into the sort of the main theme that you brought up there, and that is your inspiration in terms of society's treatment or perception of the single childless woman. I think sometimes, and you can speak to this better than I can, but there's almost like a pitying tone to that, where people are like, people kind of view that as like, you know, your single childless years are a stepping stone on the way to something else. So there ends up being this sort of built-in condescension towards people, as if it weren't a valid choice in and of its own right to live that way. And I wanted to know if I'm hitting the mark there, or if it was a little more complicated than that, or.
No, that seems pretty accurate. Especially since you've heard me talk about this before. Yeah, I think that, you know, there's a certain point for, you know, it differs, I think, regionally, but I think most women, or actually not specific to women, most people reach a point where if they're uncoupled or not interested in building a family, or both, people think there's something wrong. You know, even if you are actively dating, there's, you know, a common question I think people field is, you seem so great, like, why are you still single? As though it's problematic that you're single. And maybe, you know, often the answer was just, single is where I wanted to be, and that I decided I want to start dating, and that's, you know, it's as simple as that. So yeah, I mean, certainly at a point in my life, I was fielding a lot of questions, and they felt really jarring to me because I had almost always been coupled from the time I was 15 until I was like 31, almost nonstop, with a few months in between each relationship. So serial monogamous. And it felt really great and healthy for me to have several years where I was just alone and like really figuring out what that meant and learning how to be, you know, a human in my own right, that where my value was not determined in part by my attachment to someone. So the feeling of being happy and satisfied, possibly for the first time ever, juxtaposed with a lot of curiosity and questions from well-meaning people and less well-meaning people about, like, you know, why I wasn't coupled and whether I wanted children and things like that. It was really, yeah, it was a strange experience. And it felt, it just struck me that, like, you know, do I want this? Why do I want this? I knew for sure I did not want to be with someone again unless they added value, because my life was already really great. So I wanted to make sure it was an expansion, not a narrowing. So yeah. So
I had tons of value if you weren't getting the subtext there.
It's a weird way of talking about it. But,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
You know, genuine happiness versus just the act of pairing off. And I just started to ask why. And it occurred to me, like, you know, how often do we ask why we are doing the things we're doing when they are a thing that fits within the construct of society? It's like all these rules were created. We just follow them, often without question. And so I started asking myself those questions, and yeah, the whole conceit of it felt very cult-like.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about the book is that it mines this really unsettling kind of social issue that you wouldn't think of right off the bat as like this kind of big theme. I'm going to tackle a social issue thing, but there's such specificity to it. And I think it's been overlooked for a long time. And I think that's what makes this novel really unique. And I also, I guess, sort of jumping off of that into the fertility aspects of things, there's a great moment kind of early in the book, so I'm not giving too much away, where Andrea, the cousin, is confronting Maeve, our main character, about who's our single childless woman. She's confronting her about her eggs. And she just says, like, she just kind of like doesn't understand why Maeve won't give her eggs. And she says, she just tosses up this comment and she's like, you're not using them. And I think that's a really interesting summation of how people sort of are viewed sometimes, where it's like, just do this transaction. You're not using your eggs. What do you care? As if it wasn't a big deal, as if like the choice not to, you know, as if it just didn't matter.
I mean, maybe for some people it isn't.
Yeah, that's
you know,
true.
like there's plenty of people who make some good money that way.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I myself applied to be an egg donor at the tender age of 22 or 3 or something and got rejected. So
rejection.
I know. I think I was a little too honest in the questionnaire. But anyway, you know, I mean, for some people it isn't as personal, and for others it is. And I think that's what it comes down to, really, because this whole book is about personal choice. And I think, you know, Maeve's decisions in certain aspects of the book may not make sense to people. But like, you know, for me personally, I always had a strong sense of ambivalence when it came to the question of having children, and again, the honest questioning and the ability to choose one or the other, and also to change your mind, is to me really valuable. And for Maeve, in that moment you're describing, you know, we find that her cousin is unable. She had lost a child and is unable to conceive. And she thought, you know, we look alike. This is great. It's perfect. Why not? And Maeve just doesn't want to give her egg. And it's funny because in my writing group, when this chapter was being workshopped, that came up. Like, one of the female writers in the group was like, well, why won't you do it? And I was like, does there need to be a justification for it? I mean, she just doesn't want to. That's enough. I mean, I don't know. I would think there'd be some complicated issues there if they are genuinely engaging in a relationship and intend to be friends, and in one of those lives, like down the line, there could be some complications potentially if Andrea is, you know, raising Maeve's biological child. It just depends. It depends on the person. It depends on the arrangement they have and how comfortable both parties are. All parties are, because there'd be a father involved as well in Andrea's case.
I want to unpack something you said early on in that, which was people might not understand how Maeve makes these day-to-day decisions or these bigger decisions. And again, without giving too much away, I think there's a lot of trauma that informs her decisions. And maybe that is why some people don't quite understand why she does what she does. Do you think that is accurate? And can you expand on that a little bit?
That's definitely, I wouldn't say that necessarily plays into her resistance to donating an egg to her cousin, but it definitely influences not even necessarily her choices, but her perceptions and it influences her character in the sense that, you know, she experienced some really profound childhood trauma, and she has a very difficult time as an adult knowing who to trust, knowing whether she can trust herself.
Yeah.
So her instincts may guide her in one direction, but then she finds ways to rationalize them or justify various choices she makes, because she's never, ever known whether she can be trusted or anyone else can be trusted. The world is a big question mark for her. She also never, you know, she never had any sort of stable family unit. We see that she went through the foster care system and had like a, you know, stable-ish time there, but never really had those formative experiences that help guide children into like relationships with others, whether they're friendships or romantic relationships or whatever they may be, like an example of just like stability and consistent love. And on top of it, she's reuniting with her cousin, and that's sort of overshadowing the entire text. Is like she desperately wants closeness, and she now has that again. And it's something that she has never had. She's never had any real close friends in adulthood. So that also plays into her perception of, you know, reality and choice, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the way you described your character speaks to the exacting psychological nature of the way you brought that character to life. And what makes the book, I think, so compelling for people is
Thank you.
Well, yeah. By the way, we didn't rehearse this. Anne has no idea what I'm going to say or what I'm going to ask. So
you obviously asked me nice.
But I think that is one of the really interesting elements about the book, because it's not really playing on any kind of like unreliable narrator trope. It's deeper than that, because Maeve can't necessarily trust her own perceptions based on how she grew up. And that's really, really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were so many ways I could have written that. And like, even, I mean, without, again, it's hard to go into the mechanics of it without spoilers, but there were some opportunities to go back and revisit the structure of Maeve's childhood and what occurred there. But to me, it was really important. It was really important to have that Maeve and Andrea connection be very strong in childhood and very strong later, and not, and, and also to depict sort of like the elements of trauma at play, because, it had to be, it has to feel real that the two, when they reunite, are like really compelled to pursue this friendship in adulthood, even though so much time has passed. So
yeah,
that's part of it.
Well, that definitely came across.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so this is a horror novel, gothic horror novel, if you want to call it that. And I do want to talk a little bit about, I don't want to get too nuts and boltsy yet, but I do want to talk about the creation of horror and what makes this horrifying and what makes it unsettling. Because I think we've kind of mined a little bit of the psychology behind characters' actions so far, but we haven't talked about anything that makes it sound super scary. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you slip into those moments where it's like, okay, this is more overtly horror right now. This is horrifying. This isn't just like a vibe that we're getting from the characters. Like, this is going to be pretty scary.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I feel as though there was ever a slipping into specific moments for. I mean, yes, there are certain scenes that are more traditionally, I think, in the wheelhouse of horror. But for me, what makes things frightening is usually atmosphere, like an ominous, consistent sense of dread, and just a sense of, the other shoe being about to drop, and not knowing like what form that will take, knowing it's going to. And to me, the not knowing part is the most, that's what I find most horrifying about, horror that I consume, the like just mounting dread. And I think I like to play with that, like the tension there. And I also, we talked about, you mentioned psychology. Like, to me, psychological horror is most profoundly terrifying, because, it's the idea of our brains betraying us, or of people, getting inside our heads and making us question our sense of reality. I find that really scary. There are, in addition to that, some specific moments that are more, like physical representations of I guess, like traditional horror, in the sense that there's like a lot of spiders, and I don't like spiders.
She hates spiders.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting better. I'm definitely getting better. But now that we live in the country,
not better.
You didn't see the before.
We
really.
Just killed one right before this incident.
That's not true. It was already dead. Anyway, well.
I think that's interesting, because I agree with you that sort of once you're in this sort of world of these psychological threads that are creating tension and dread. I don't know who to look at when I'm talking. It's pretty hard.
We can look there.
When you're in these, when you're already navigating these currents, it makes it feel a lot more organic from a writer's perspective, I think, when events kind of like, follow from there. And I know that for me, when I get in my own head about it, and I think, all right, Andy, you're a horror writer, like, sit down and write a scary scene right now. Like, it becomes the most flat, I know,
actually, yeah, it's funny you say that, because like the spider scene I thought was like the least scary. Like, it's just like, it was truly like, here's a spider. I don't know, I mean, I hope it was more than that, but to me, it was the least frightening. Seeing, like, I'm afraid of spiders, but then, like, when you're very intentional about writing the horror, it feels a little mechanical and contrived.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Anne brought up atmosphere before, and as she knows, I tend to skew more on the atmospheric side, and I tend to define horror as like a free-floating thing that descends like a cloud over any kind of narrative or whatever. So yeah, when it comes to our dog's here. When it comes to actually sitting down and being like, time to be scary, I think Anna and I sort of both agree that it sort of develops from the narrative and the characters' decisions and things like that.
Well, also it's like, if you're in that zone of writing, you're not really thinking time to be scared. You know, like if you're really lost in a scene, that's when the best writing happens. I think, you know, it's just going to be what it, like, you'll get there without having to put the intentionality in. But I will say a lot of people in reading Just Like Mother have noted how it also has a lot of thriller influences. And that makes sense. I think a lot about that, but to me, thriller is more a structure and meaning like it's a pace and it's a framework. And I do read a lot of thrillers. So it made sense that would, you know, influence this book. And then horror is like ratcheting up to a different level. There's so many types of horror. Horror is like, if you twisted it just so, if you took this like risky, dangerous scenario, like say you took your average thriller and then you just made it weirder and more sinister and more, you know, in some ways, and in my particular book, more ludicrous, that's where it started to feel like horror when I was writing it.
Yeah, ludicrous is a good word because that's what interests me about. I can use using thriller mechanics is one thing, but horror frees you up to be like to make that decision where it sort of, you know, takes off into the stratosphere. It doesn't necessarily have to be grounded in what we understand to be thriller mechanics, I guess.
Yeah. Like it has to be grounded in the story itself. Like I can't feel just like the story became something totally different. Sure. But as long as it works like within the rules and frameworks of the framework of the story, I think, yeah, it definitely feels more freeing to me as a genre. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's one of the things I love about it is that it feels like endless fertile ground for creativity more than, you know, maybe outside of fantasy or something like that. But yeah, for me,
the depths of our dark imaginations. And Andy's is really dark.
Depths.
Andy's imagination is very, very dark. So it is. Your depths are dark.
Speaking of dark imaginations, we did not plan these tangents, but here we go. I want to talk a little bit about New Life, which is the company in the book, and I also want to get into dolls. So if you can explain a little bit about New Life and what it does, and I want to talk about maybe some of your influences or the way New Life fits into this kind of like modern influencer slash this is sort of like influencer tech culture that's kind of really pervasive.
Sure.
Sorry, that was a really open-ended question, but
New Life. So New Life, for anyone watching who has not read the book, is so Maeve and Andrea are Maeve is our protagonist. Andrea, meaning that it's written from Maeve's perspective. Andrea is her cousin who she reunites with. Andrea has made a success of her life and in every, you know, on paper way. Like she has a lot of money. She has a doting husband and like this business that's incredibly successful. She started as a life coach, in part influenced by her dedication, her dedication to motherhood. So this idea that, sorry, I got distracted by working now. This idea that like motherhood is sort of like the biggest, most powerful thing a woman can do. And in losing, so you know, she had this whole business dedicated to how to be a successful mother, how to, you know, preparing for motherhood, preparing for parenthood, like, and then also when she lost her child, it became, there was an offshoot, like grieving the loss of a child aspect. And then, you know, she started holding workshops. It was sort of, you know, lifestyle workshops. And then she manufactured this doll because it's what helped her. Having a very lifelike replica of her daughter who passed away, like, is what helps her cope and allowed her to move on. So she created the doll, both, again, like dual purpose of preparing for motherhood and also grieving. And that doll, because it was so lifelike and mimicked the behaviors of a child, took off and made her fortune. So that is New Life. And, you know, she sustains it through, again, like through workshops, classes, You know, like things they pay. I think it was like 10,000. How many? I don't know. There's maybe it was $30,000 for like a week. I don't know. It was a lot of money for a week-long workshop with Andrea, and she also has become sort of this like guru in the way that maybe we look at Gwyneth Paltrow for Goop and things like that. Just a very magnetic, a beautiful woman with a magnetic personality that people are drawn to, and she has all the answers. And so that's her business. Was there more?
No. I think thinking of it as like the Goop vibes, but like that simmering dark underbelly of Goop that's just right there is a really funny way to look at it, and pretty accurate too. I think that was really interesting. I have a question about dolls.
Okay.
That was intense preamble, but did you was there a formative doll experience in your childhood, or did you always find them inherently creepy in the way that people always think dolls are creepy?
I don't find dolls
creepy. Do you love dolls?
I don't love dolls, but I do find a love of dolls creepy.
Yeah.
And that's what, no, I mean, is there
like when you go somewhere and people have lots of dolls, that's pretty weird.
Yeah, that's really weird. But did I tell you about a formative doll experience that you're alluding to that I don't remember now? No,
I wanted to know. And I thought this was the best venue to find that out.
I mean, I had a doll called Baby Tiny. That was.
That's weird.
It was tiny, and it was, you know, it had like a little you know, like not yarn body, but like a cloth body and like rubber legs. I was fairly attached to it, I would say, but and like everyone else, an American Girl doll.
Yeah.
Anyway, you don't know anything about that.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, no, I think I liked dolls like at a normal level, but I do. What I find strange is that we give kids dolls like right away, and so from the second they are, you know, able to lift their heads and toddle, they have dolls, and it's like we're prepping kids to become mothers from day one. And that just is not something that I, you know, have had a lot of feelings about for most of life. It's just a thing that occurred to me when I was writing this book. It's like, wow, this is so deeply ingrained that we're literally being trained from very early on to one day become mothers. And then, yeah, the idea of people who love dolls, I do find quite creepy. You know, to each their own. Like, I get it. There's some cool collections to have and things like that. But, well, this is now reminding me of the clown house that Caroline and my best friend and I stumbled on, an estate sale once, and walked in, and it was just clowns, like all kinds of clowns, like filling the whole estate, which was just its own thing. But I built in the creepy aspect of people being obsessed with dolls into the book in various scenes where all these people coming to these workshops are so into their lifelike dolls that they're actually like walking around nursing them. They're like full on, you know, pulling out their nipple, and the baby's there, and they're like talking to her like it's real. And something about the idea of grown women playing with dolls, like if you just swap out the kid playing with a doll and put in a grown woman, it's yeah, it is incredible. Thank you. I thought so too. It's very creepy. Is it someone in the comments?
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. It's just this idea of like grown women playing with dolls that like struck me as singularly like chilling.
Yeah.
So. But
you yourself have a healthy relationship with dolls.
Well, we don't have any. Although people love.
We do not have dolls.
People love giving us Raggedy Ann and Auntie paraphernalia because of our names. So like I don't know. It's very sweet. Our neighbors, you know, gift us little Raggedy Ann and Auntie things frequently. So I wouldn't be surprised if we owned a few sets soon.
Yeah. Burgeoning doll collection. Okay, I want to get a little bit before we cruise into the second half here. I want to get into some of the nuts and bolts writing stuff that I'd love to talk about. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to chime in. First of all, there are several flashback scenes to the Mother Collective, to Maeve's childhood in the novel, and they it's not a super overt stylistic shift. There is kind of like a different vibe to the writing, which I love. And I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about whether or not that was conscious, or whether those particular vignettes kind of came out that way.
Came out that way.
So, like, was that an organic thing that it felt right when you were writing it? Or were you thinking like, I want to set these off in a stylistic way?
Well, I think I set them off, but in terms of present tense, I believe I made the present day and past, yes, and then the flashbacks in present tense, which that part was very conscious because it felt like there was more immediacy there, and they're a little bit spare in the writing style. So I wanted to still get that like attachment to characters without having to go into too much exposition, I guess. But that voice definitely felt really natural. I enjoy writing in that particular voice. And interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, I don't know. That was like a late stage build in those flashbacks. And it was something I was really hesitant to do. I just wasn't, honestly, because this is my first horror novel, I just wasn't sure what like was okay in terms of pushing the envelope, which is silly because there's a lot of stuff out there that's, you know, way more, you know, this is tamer than other things that are out there. But for those flashbacks, I loved writing. And to me, I love writing the ending of the book, and I love writing the flashbacks. Those are my favorite parts to write. That voice for some reason came really naturally, which I don't know, like how, I don't know if that's weird because it's like a creepy child voice, but
it's great.
Hopefully I'll get another chance to mine it for something else because it is a fun one to write. There's just something very visceral. And the other thing is like seeing the world through a child's eyes. It's just a different experience, and they interpret things differently, and they just don't know. Like everything's a mystery, and they have to kind of guess at it. And it's like the duality of like the reader knowing something else is going on. For example, you know, at one point, the children think there's a dog and like being kept for them as a surprise in another room. And it turns out not to be a dog, but, you know, they're very convinced it is, but the reader knows. And so you have this, and this, like, hopefully this dread when you're reading. And then, and it's also like a little bit more heart-wrenching because it's like a child who's having to face a difficult reality. So I think, that aspect of it, I don't know. There's just something about like the child experience that I like writing.
Yeah, it definitely comes across. You mentioned those particular chapters being late additions to the manuscript. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the way the manuscript evolved and the way the story developed. Mm-hmm. When you wrote the first draft and you take a look at the finished novel now, do you have a sense of what sort of remained from that original draft?
Yeah, it's like, I think there's only one chapter that is still a full, probably not even the whole chapter. It's probably like 20 total pages that are intact from my early drafts. And I rewrote the first 100 pages for whatever reason. I just like rewrote those 7-8 times. I think just figuring out the direction of the characters. And then once I felt that was firmly in place and I knew where I was going and I knew what I wanted to say, then it went very quickly from there. Originally the setup was just a bunch of friends going on a vacation together. They do it every single year. It's their reunion, and it's like the best thing, and they all look forward to it. And then one year everything is different, and one person feels like the outsider. And so that was the original setup. So having this, you know, then I wrote in the flashbacks, and it came together a little bit. It came together organically, honestly. I mean, the cult of motherhood wasn't a literal cult in the first draft. It was. Yeah. And then it just made sense when I wrote it in. I was like, oh, yeah, cult of motherhood.
Yeah. So there's really only like a little bit of that original draft left in the.
Little.
You're a true rewriter when you revise, or at least you were.
It's true, and you know that.
I do.
About me.
I knew that already.
Yeah, I do rewrite a lot, which makes, like I'm working on a new book now. It makes it very, very daunting knowing that very little of this will exist in the future. It's like, you know, writing hundreds of pages and knowing they most likely will not make it to final is really daunting. But at the same time, trusting that as like part of the, just part of the mental journey in terms of figuring out the story and what is working and what sticks. And I really love rewriting. I love having a draft to just play with. It's like, having that full draft is, I think, the hardest part. Once you have it, you can really figure out what you're trying to say, because so many things, and this is actually something Andy, I read Andy's writing a lot, and like I read this, which is very good and out in October. Something Andy does that's that's really cool is like write these books and he doesn't know what they're about and in the first draft, and then I'll read it and I'll be like, oh, this is what it's about, and he'll be like, oh.
Yeah, I have
You're
no
like,
idea.
I didn't even know that's what it was about, but like it's clearly there. And so yeah, I think just extracting those themes and trying to figure out what you yourself don't know you're trying to say, like the subconscious aspects of writing are pretty fascinating and fun. You can surprise yourself.
I agree that that sort of self-surprise is one of the things that makes it really great. But I will say that early on, now that I'm kind of this far into my career, it's just kind of is what it is. But I will say that early on, when you're really struggling and you're developing a draft, it is a big hurdle, a psychological hurdle, at least at first, to know that you could write 500 pages and maybe 50 of them are going to end up in the final draft, but you have to write those pages in order to have the big thing that you can tear apart to do that. It's just an interesting art form in that regard.
Some people probably don't work that. I mean, probably some people just have an outline and write from the outline, and like Andy doesn't write from an outline at all. I'm kind of a mix of the two, where I know the general arc of what I want to say, and then I start like a list of scenes and just write to those scenes, and then sort of like piece it together like a puzzle, and then cut a bunch, and eventually it form. You know, I have more of a sense of the like beginning, middle, end than you do. But but yeah, some people really just like have a story, and I don't know. I just think there needs to be room for organic developments. Like if I hadn't left room for the cult to come in, this book would not be like, it just wouldn't be what it is at all. Not even close. And probably, I don't know. I mean, I think probably not as enjoyable. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think when it comes to writing advice, if you, anything prescriptive is just kind of like, you know, whatever, because everybody does something different. I mean, some people write like one page and make it real good and then go to the next page and make it perfect. And it's like, to me, that's like a, you know, I can't imagine doing something like that, but
I totally used to do that. That was Circle 9. My very first book, my YA book, Circle 9, I wrote it that way.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that like gives me hives trying to imagine writing a page.
Isn't that what you do? Oh, you don't make it perfect. Is the difference?
Well, it comes out perfect, so I don't really need to make it perfect.
Does anyone have any questions about craft or reflections?
Does anyone want to reflect?
It's weird talking to the screen and not knowing if anyone's even out there.
Yeah. It's a void, as far as I know.
Anyway.
Well, I know for me. Oh, hey, Margo.
I'll pop up with a question about craft.
Sure.
Since you both have written for adults and for YA, are there differences in process in terms of like writing for those audiences, or is it a very similar process?
I think I mean, look, I'm not probably one to say for sure, because I never felt very confident about my YA writing. I honestly felt like I was trying to shove adult scenarios into a YA format. But I would say the difference there and that awareness is you do have a lot more freedom. I mean, to me, it's just it's literally just a perspective. So in writing YA, you have to really think about where your characters are in life, and writing from that specific perspective of the world. Like as a person who hasn't experienced quite as much yet, but a person who has like a lot of thoughts and opinions on things, but isn't, you know, at the same place in life. And then adults are a little more world weary, I would say. There might be, you know, there's aspects of life that are different after time passes. And so capturing that perspective, and then also like fewer limits in terms of content, you can certainly get darker and sexier and whatever, and having no restrictions, I find very freeing.
Yeah.
Also, I think like this might be a little controversial, but I do think like commercial plot in the YA market is a little more necessary. It's certainly not that every worthwhile book, you know, you can have a beautiful book, but it is harder, I think, to succeed and reach an audience without like a very like hooky plot, I think. Just harder. But, you know, in adult, there's a little more room.
Yeah, I agree that there's a little more room to sprawl out and experiment a little bit. But I write, I have an ongoing series with Scholastic of middle grade historical novels. So they're like adventure novels set in, you know, historical disaster contexts. But that sweet spot of that age group is like, you know, 9 to 12 roughly. So it's even younger than YA. And they have to be really snappy. You know, the short chapters, like you're hooking a kid from page 1 and they really want to know what's going on. And so while that's way different than the sort of more sprawling adult horror novels that I write, there are a few lessons in just writing a page-turning novel, regardless of what you're going for, that I think can be applied to everything. Like, they're not mystery novels, but I try to have, in the kids' books, each chapter tries to have one focus where there's like one clue or one piece of new information that drags people to the next chapter that is then built on that piece of information. So there's like a really logical through line. And I think Anne will probably laugh at the idea that there's logical through lines in my adult novels, which are, again, a little more sprawling. But there is that kind of lesson, and you can obviously subvert that stuff when you write adult a lot more than you can writing a book for a 10-year-old. But the lesson still applies in that, like, a chapter might be weird and it might feel kind of all over the place, but it does serve a purpose. And there's some bit of information your characters need to know. Something has to come out that makes the chapter compelling and will drag people along to the next one. And I know for me, something that I've been thinking about lately as I work is a quote that I'm going to butcher a little bit, but I think it's Brandon Sanderson, the fantasy writer, who has a lot of ideas about writing and is very successful, obviously. But he has this great quote that's like, every chapter should be someone's favorite. Not every chapter should be everyone's favorite, but like every chapter should have this cool element. That's cool element's a little reductive, but like every chapter should have something that you can imagine someone somewhere being like, oh my God, that is my favorite chapter of this book.
That is a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, but and I don't think it necessarily has to be that high pressure where it's like a crazy thing has to happen in this chapter or no one's going to like it.
Like no chapter can be a dud.
Yeah, but that is, I mean, that's a lot of pressure, but I think thinking like that for both adults and kids is really useful.
But then what if you think of every line that way? Then it's like...
Yeah, and also every line should not be a dud.
I mean, ideally, but man.
So yeah, in short, I guess for me, there are parallels, although it tends to be a totally different process.
That's really interesting. I think it does sound like there are sort of general craft kind of, I don't want to say rules of thumb, but like techniques that can carry over. Because as I'm thinking as an adult, like, you know, my attention span is not that much longer than a 10-year-old. So having like, you know, the really being able to recognize that and apply some of those techniques.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely, like, my background in YA, editing YA even, and just making sure that everything propels you forward. I definitely bring some of that into my own writing, and maybe almost too much. Like, I'm more plot driven than Andy is. And it's interesting thing we talk about, like, his, you know, you can kind of get lost in his prose, and I'm just much more like, what is the story? Where is it going? You know, and I think some of that does come from, which is not to say, I mean, there's tons of YA that doesn't take that format, but, you know, I think being more focused on those elements feels natural to me bringing it into adult.
So a related question that's kind of a craft-based writing nuts and bolts question. Earlier in the conversation, you were talking about kind of the difference between like thriller and horror and like what constitutes horror. And I thought it was very interesting how you were saying like horror is, you know, this atmospheric, this sort of, and Andy was saying it kind of is like allows for this expansiveness in writing. To me, as like a writer who has never written horror but who likes to read it, that sounds so intimidating. I wonder if you have like tips for people who would want to like tiptoe in to like writing horror, who haven't done it before.
I mean, look, some people who read my book say it isn't horror. Like I think it is. I think what it is a hybrid of thriller and horror. I think you just have to, it's kind of like, there's plenty of horror films that we watch and aren't scared by. It really is just what scares you. And if you're a writer, I think just like plumbing the depths of your own nightmares, your own fears, because that's when it's going to feel authentically frightening, everyone's definition of horror is different. But if it's frightening to you and you're able to convey that fear, that genuine fear to the page, I think that's what matters most.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said nightmares, because something that I think about that helps me sort of get into that atmospheric zone is thinking about how a nightmare or even like a creepy dream feels, but not try to replicate that on, like, I'm not trying to write stream of consciousness dream logic stories, because no one really wants to read something that just is a dream forever, right? Like, but there is a really specific off-kilter sense that I like to inhabit when I'm writing, and that I think is close to how something sort of nightmarish feels. And again, it's not to say that like everyone's faces are changing and like, you know, there's a tree in the house and it's not like a dream, but it is like the way that might have made me feel as soon as I wake up is sort of like a really useful tool for me to get into the zone of that. So if that helps, that helps me. Anyway.
And I actually have like vivid nightmares several times a week that I got in the habit years and years ago of just waking up and writing down and falling back asleep, and then the next day discovering a paragraph in my phone, which I don't know, imagery I think is more important to me than others. I was on a panel recently at Comic-Con where people were talking about like how they, like, some people actually visualize their stories in words, and mine is like a movie. It's just like I'm watching, you know, images and scenes, and it is very much that's, you know, I'm picturing scenes playing out when I'm writing, and to me it's like transcribing scenes. It's very much like, and there is kind of an altered state when you're like really in the zone, as you know, as a writer, you know, and it does feel like you're dreaming in a way, or you're playing pretend as a kid, like those days when you could just get so lost in your like imagination that you don't notice time passing and it feels so real. Like that's how writing is for me. And yeah, like maybe that contributes to like the amount of like very vivid, very visual nightmares I have. But sometimes I can like mind those somewhat. They're usually too weird to mind, but every now and then.
So Andy, I don't want to step on if there were any more questions that you had kind of lined up. I don't want to step on that, but I have like other questions for Anne and about the book, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's good.
So one of the things that I really attracted to this book is just this motherhood is such a hot topic, maybe a timeless topic, but it's also very timely, and it seems to be particularly ripe for horror in some way, like from Rosemary's Baby to like the recent like HBO Max show, The Baby. Motherhood seems to be like something that we feel kind of horror about, or that like easily lends itself to horror. Do you see that, and what do you think about that, and how did that maybe impact the book you wrote?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many aspects of motherhood that, like, everything from giving birth to what if I screw up my kid to, are you looking at that gopher now? Sorry, there's a gopher in our backyard. I kept getting distracted.
I didn't see the gopher. Oh, yeah, he's huge.
Anyway, I kept looking off to the side at him. Anyway, but so there are many aspects of it. They're terrifying. Like, there's body horror in it, and there's, you know, the idea that, like, you know, I love is it Baby Teeth? The book of the like psychopath kid. There's like that. Babadook works so well because it's this idea that like when you're in the throes of like no sleep, frustration, like what if you do? Like everyone feels this like, oh, I can't last another second. And like, what if you were to tip over into a place where you could be violent toward your kid? That is, to me, that is why that movie was so terrifying. Yeah, I personally like to plumb, I keep saying plumb today, I don't know why. Just explore topics that that have like various elements, various, I don't know, familiar aspects of horror, like whether it's body horror or psychological terror, or, and, you know, I'm writing a book now about like the fear of aging, and it's so perfect too. It's like claustrophobia, being trapped in your body when your body gives out, but your mind is still sharp. It's like losing all of your influence because no one respects you anymore at your work. It's, you know, like someone not finding you beautiful anymore, like all these, you know, all these aspects of aging that are frightening. You know, not trusting your mind anymore, things like that. So yeah, it's another one you can do a lot with. But to me, the part that felt most interesting in terms of exploring the content of Just Like Mother was like that, as far as I know, no one, or at least no one that I had read, had explored the idea that women, you know, especially feminist women, can be so vicious and unsupportive. Women who purport to be feminists, I should say, can really be complicit in tearing one another down and making it harder to make these choices, whether to be a mother. So
it definitely does have this sort of like when you see motherhood depicted in the culture, it often seems like you were saying when you were talking about kind of the idea for the book, it seems to have this sort of divisive like element to it where it's like you're a mother or you're not.
People are also they're competitive. It's like, also, I mean, I froze my eggs a little over a year ago, and even that, it was like competition. It was like other people who were in my life who had done it before were like asking what my number was to compare it to their number. It was like, oh my, it was the weirdest thing, like being congratulated on how well I was doing. I was like, good job, ovaries. Like, I'm not doing anything other than drinking a lot of water and eating salty meat as instructed. And like, but like, it's all of it. So much of it is luck. So much of it is just, we don't have control over it at all. And maybe that's what drives people so crazy about it, is the lack of control and feeling like one person has something that the other person wants. And I liked exploring that with all my characters. Like, there's a character, Emily, who has a child, and that, you know, maybe she regrets having had and doesn't really want a second one, but, you know, is about to have a second one. And, you know, she has some like, did I ever want this in the first place? Did I want to be a mother? There's, you know, Andrea, who desperately wants to be a mother and can't be. And then Maeve, who never wanted kids. And, you know, there's just so many different, it's complicated, and people can really, it's sensitive. When people are that emotional about it, it can get ugly.
Can you talk a little bit about, because there are kind of multiple different characters in different, like, who kind of embody or embrace different aspects of motherhood or different elements of motherhood, what it was like writing that from a psychological perspective, because you have to be able to kind of get in the mind of like someone who is a mother, someone who, you know, is a mother and maybe feels ambivalent about it, somebody who doesn't want to be a mother, you know, all of those at one time feels like quite the project to take on.
I think because I've always experienced ambivalence, it was actually not that difficult to get into the mindset of like the yes or the no, like you know, arguing myself into, because, you know, that's, I go back and forth. It's like, I don't know, like, here are the reasons it's good, here are the reasons I don't want to, here are the ways it would change my life, like for the worse or the better, and like, what if this and what if that, and so it's fairly easy to just explore like those journeys, like just go down that path through different characters. If I were like adamantly, if I had one very strong opinion, it might have been more difficult, honestly. Yeah. Sometimes it really is just a leap of faith. And I have to say, like, I have friends who said, I didn't know if I made a huge mistake up until like the day like literally it was, you know, coming out of me. And then I had other friends who in confidence said that they didn't say they regretted it, but they said like, look, I love my children, but like, you're not missing out if you don't have them. You're missing out if you do. You're missing out on certain things you'll no longer be able to explore or have. And I thought that was really brave, and I appreciated it. I really appreciate it when people don't talk about that stuff a lot. And when people, you know, when I don't know, when people like chose to speak so openly, I was really grateful, because it makes me feel less crazy and less like, wow, I'm the only one, you know, who doesn't know. And it turns out like a lot of people don't know.
Yes, I mean, I appreciate them being honest with you, and like that, you know, you relaying that information to us, because it does seem like this thing that in the culture is not talked about, and like the multifaceted nature and just like the fascinating kind of nature of motherhood gives this book a lot of really, really I don't know, just it's so compelling, and there's so much depth and there's so much to explore there. I really loved it. We have 5 minutes left, and so I wonder if I could ask both of you just like a few of our kind of author questions that you'd like to ask. Okay. So the first question is, it doesn't have to be the #1 writer, but maybe somebody in the top 3, a writer alive or dead who you would want to, spend an hour with, asking them about their books or their process or anything. Who would be the writer for you?
Oh man, these are the questions that always stump me. My answers are so generic. That's the problem. I mean, Shirley Jackson, but also, I don't know. There's one writer I was obsessed with as a kid, and I don't know if I necessarily want to ask her a bunch of questions about craft, but I'd like to hang out with her and like just tell her how much her books meant to me. And now I'm blanking on her name. It's the Betsy Tacy series. Maud Heart Loveless. Is that right? I think that's what it is. No, am I making it?
Loveless.
That feels like maybe it's right. I don't know. It was like the Betsy Tacy and Tibbs series, and these books I was so obsessed. Yeah, Maud Heart Loveless. Like when I was done, I really only read the high school series. When I was done, I cried. I distinctly remember feeling like I was losing a group of friends because they were just my friends for the period of time that those books were in my life. And yeah. How about you?
Andy?
The first thing that popped in my head when you said that was Cormac McCarthy, because he doesn't do, I know. Well, he just doesn't do, I mean, as far as like modern writers who are still alive go, there aren't that many like really genuinely reclusive kind of people. And he really so rarely does any interviews and he doesn't talk about his books or really his process or anything. So if I were to have a magical interaction with him where he would suddenly be willing to talk about that stuff and open to talking about it, it would be pretty interesting to talk to the guy that wrote Blood Meridian and be like, what was going on there?
Both excellent answers. So this question is the last question I'll ask. Thank you guys so much for being here with us. And if you don't, I feel like this would be a new one just for you guys. And I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask it. But if you don't want to answer, please feel free to say pass.
Sorry.
What is it like being in a relationship with another writer? Pros, cons,
The con is the biggest con is like the clash of our giant egos.
No. Luckily, only my ego is giant. No. No, we for some reason we're not competitive for whatever reason, but we talk about that a lot, how it feels lucky. And I don't know. I think I'm just generally not that competitive with other writers because I am also an editor, so that just wouldn't work. I don't know. Like, it's just not possible. Yeah. Plus, like, there's room for us all. We're pretty supportive. Like, we read each other's work, and I would say, honestly, it works out fairly well in terms of being really supportive. And we write very differently. We have like different styles, so we can sort of like we read and are able to, I don't know, come at it from a different perspective and help shape each other's work. I think. I mean, we actually like got together because he asked me to freelance edit one of his books. So
yeah,
we had known each other for a long time.
It's pretty built into.
But yeah, but so like that already was a thing. And I honestly had a strict rule when I was dating, like not to date another writer. So I don't know what happened, but it's worked out well. I guess goes to show life can surprise you.
Absolutely. Love always wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can have a plan for what where things go.
Yeah.
But
so true. An important lesson in life and in writing, I think.
Yeah.
I do think sometimes this is maybe a negative for Andy. I get very I think knowing the publishing industry, I'm always like, well, did you I am very possibly a little too directive and being like, well, did you ask that question? Like, did you explore this path? Like, you know, I'll be like, did you have a marketing meeting?
Yeah, all
I
that
don't know about that
mysterious
title.
stuff. It's like,
I'll be like, really? Like, is that really the title you want? Like,
yeah,
you know, or like that cover design could be improved. And it's like his editor probably wants to actually kill me because I'm very like, no, I think that could be stronger, or like that, you know.
Yeah, and I
so
tend to be passive.
Like, I definitely like sometimes when like I look at his stuff as like if you were a writer on my list, and I'd be like advocating for this, but it's not. I have to like really step away. I think I was better at stepping away for this last one.
Yeah.
Hard to turn that part of your brain off, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Well, Anne, Andy, I want to thank you both so much for being here. This was an absolutely excellent conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I want to remind the audience that this will continue to live here. This conversation will continue to live at this link. So if you have friends, other writers, readers who weren't able to make it live but would want to watch the conversation, you can direct them here. It'll also be available on Hub City Writers Project's YouTube page, so you can send them there as well. Thank you again to everyone for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.